Herxheim is a typical German town in southwestern Germany. Beautiful timber frame buildings, a nice old church, and of course, a doner and pizza house. But Herxheim has something that your typical German town doesn't often have. An archaeological site so gruesome, it would make Genghis Khan feel queasy. Sponsored by KiwiCo. I must say I'm very disappointed in you all. My last video on the archaeology of war in the Neolithic was extremely popular. You disgust me. I thought I was talking to chill Bob Ross types. No. On a serious note, though, you are correct. I do have to talk about these kinds of sites, really, because I probably can be guilty of romanticizing the past, and you don't want to do that too much. You don't want to, play into the idea of the noble savage. That there was this mythical past where humans lived in harmony with nature, and, everything was perfect, blah, 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 blah. That's absolutely not the case, of course. We don't want to do that. You have to look at the past. Honestly, good and the bad. Consider these videos a warning not to travel back in time. Okay, this is the Time Travel Awareness Society. Time Travel Awareness Service. Actually, that's even better. Time Travel Awareness Service. It's like the FBI, but we stop you going back in time. If you are going to go back in time, though, don't go to Neolithic Herxheim. The culture we're going to be talking about today is called the linear band ceramic, or LBK, the linear pottery culture in English, because they made pottery with lots of nice lines. It's a very simple name. This culture lasted archaeologically for about 1,000 years, from sort of 5,500 BCE to 4,500 BCE, so roughly 7,000 years ago. The people of the LBK were the first farmers of Central Europe, descending from farming communities that had sprung up in Anatolia, southern Greece, and were spreading north into Europe. This culture spanned from sort of northern Serbia up into Germany, France, Belgium, Netherlands. A huge swath of territory, but within that land, they were kind of confined just to riverbanks, to the loess soil, which provided them the most fertile land for their crops. These rivers really were the lifeblood of society, and it's easy to see why. These people were farming on the frontiers, the very limits of biology. They were growing crops like wheat, for example, that had evolved in much warmer climates, right? Anatolia, the Mediterranean region. And they were applying it to a new climate. They were really farming on sort of the limit of what biology and culture and technology would allow. They built long timber-framed houses and lived in villages that could get quite large. What's the largest one? A place called Vrabel in Slovakia. Archaeologists unearthed 313 longhouses and estimate the site was occupied for 200 to 300 years. So quite big villages, farming lifestyle. It sounds kind of idyllic. I think a lot of us crave this return to a simple life, crave this return to nature, but it was probably a terrible time to be alive. Now, believe it or not, this exploration of all of our nightmares is sponsored by a KiwiCo, which is kind of crazy, but it is. KiwiCo's mission is to get your kids learning about the world around them. I absolutely love them. I'm super proud to be sponsored by them. My kids absolutely love getting these KiwiCo crates. They arrive every month. They recently got this awesome one, my daughter did, which taught them about centrifugal force through blasting paint, which they absolutely loved. And fortunately, it didn't make a mess, if that's what you're wondering as a parent. They're super well made, very high quality. Everything you need to make them comes in the box. Obviously, my kids are different ages, right? But they do them both together. And obviously, I help them too. It's a whole family activity, and it just gets them off the screens. It's the best. The stuff they learn about and the sort of conversations that are started by like that centrifugal thing, I think it really does stick with them. And it gives you an opportunity to talk about science with them in a fun way. They don't feel like they're sitting down in a lesson. We're just learning and talking and doing this cool thing. I want my kids to be curious about the world around them. I don't know what they will want to be, whether they'll like archaeology like me or anything else, whatever. I don't mind what they want to be interested in. I don't mind what they want to do. I just want them to be curious. I think if I can encourage them to be curious about the world around them and, enjoy learning and things like that, that's all I can do as a parent. And KiwiCo is great for that. They have this Halloween 3-pack bundle at the minute, which I'm sure is super fun. And if you go to kiwicode.com/Stefan, you will get 50% off your first month. You won't regret it. Your kids will love it. Thank you, KiwiCo, for being such a big supporter of science on YouTube. When they weren't farming, the people of the LBK were no strangers to conflict. Check this out. You've definitely heard of this site, probably. It's the most famous site of the LBK, maybe, the Talheim Death Pit. It's actually only about 70 kilometers from Herxheim and dates to the same time period, the LBK. Found in 1983, archaeologists uncovered the remains of 34 people, 9 men, 7 women, and sadly 16 children, very sadly. Considering the age profile of the people here, it seems like maybe an entire community or one or two of these longhouses was just wiped out. And they were defo killed. There's signs of violence all over the bodies. This is not a plague pit or something like that. These people came to a sticky end. Another site of interest is the Austrian village of Schletz. Here, archaeologists found an LBK village that contained perhaps remains of about 12 longhouses. The village was seemingly enclosed by 2 parallel ditches, probably a fortification of some kind, and the outer ditch contained the remains of at least 67 people. Doesn't seem like they were buried, but just left out in the open, because it seems like animals were able to get at some of the bodies. There's a gnawing on the bones and disarticulation of them. Things like that. It seems like they were disturbed by an animal. Of the 22 remains that were identified as younger adults, so they put this as age 20 to 40, there's a big sex imbalance. 17 male remains, but only 5 female. Why is that? I don't know. Is it an absolutely terrible thought? Yes. In a DNA study of the remains, it doesn't seem like these people were close relatives, which is very interesting. It is very interesting. Why did these specific people end up in this pit? Was the community just large enough that a lot of people weren't close relatives, or is something else going on? We don't know. But that is very interesting, isn't it? You would think these would be very closely related people. Last site I'm going to mention before Herxheim, Kilienstaden in Germany. Here, 26 people were recovered from a death pit, also dating to the LBK, of course. What's kind of interesting and macabre about this site is that it seems a lot of the people's long bones were broken. It's basically horrible. The people of the LBK are not here to play. Is it appropriate to come up with a little rhyme when you're talking about such a horrible event? I don't know. These aren't even all the sites that show evidence of conflict during this LBK time period. I'm just listing them to make the point that the people in this time were no strangers to conflict and violence. And despite all of that, Herxheim really stands out. It's crazy. Herxheim was discovered during the construction of an industrial area in the town. And of course, the builders, the villagers, the townsfolk started to notice the just huge amount of bones that were coming out of the ground. Archaeologists came in, they found an LBK village, quite large, 250 meters by 230 meters, surrounded by an enclosure. Or at least that is what they first thought. The enclosure seems to be an illusion. It's just lots of overlapping pits. What are in these pits? A huge amount of bones. Dog bones, cow bones, and lots of human bones. In all, the minimum number of people excavated was 500. But here's the kicker, here's the crazy thing. They haven't even excavated half of the pits. This is coming from just under half the pits. So the total number of people here could be much, much higher, maybe even over 1,000 people. So why were all these people here? There are some clues which might give us an idea. At first thought, you might think this is the aftermath of a battle. Maybe like some of these other LBK sites that I mentioned earlier. The aftermath of a battle that didn't go in one village's favor. But it seems like something more complex is going on. First of all, are conflicts in this time capable of marshalling 1,000 people? Do settlements contain that many people, are that many people fighting at any one time? That seems like a lot for these early farming communities. Not that they just lived on their own, but 1,000 people, 500 people, that seems high. The main clue that something else a little bit more complex is going on, though, is that it seems these people were eaten. The human remains basically show identical treatment to the animal remains. They're butchered in a way which would allow somebody to get at their tasty meat. There's a lot of sort of separation of the ribs, of the long bones, things like that. There's also very careful separation of the skull caps. Check it out. This is even one of the skulls right here. You can kind of see the top of the head has been very carefully removed. This is a really common treatment of the bodies at Herxheim. That's obviously a very horrible thing to say, and I don't know how to link it to the next thought. Another interesting clue is that deposited alongside these pits, alongside the human remains, were broken pieces of pottery. All these human remains, by the way, they're totally broken. They're totally, smashed to bits, bones everywhere. There's only a couple of burials where the person is like articulated and intact. Majority of this 500 people, a vast majority of them, just fragments. That's all that's left of them, just fragments. It seems like, they're treating pottery the same way. There seems to be lots of deliberately smashed pieces of pottery in these pits. And some of them are coming from far away, based on, the study of the flint found in here, of the pottery. Some of these people may have been traveling as far as 400 or 500 kilometers to get to Herxheim. Quite a long way. Just based on the number of people, this probably isn't one event. It's hard to say for sure, but probably not one event. But it doesn't seem like a protracted thing either. Maybe these were accumulated over 50 years is an estimate. It's hard to say for sure, right? Because dating archaeological sites, there's a lot of overlap. Dating cannot be super precise, but maybe it's not one event based on the number of people, but it also doesn't seem to be going on for a very long time. This isn't a site seemingly occupied for centuries and centuries and centuries. So based on the evidence that humans seem to be treating in a systematic way, including cannibalism, based on the sheer numbers of people involved, and based on the fact that items are seemingly traveling quite far to get to Herxheim, the two hypotheses I've seen mentioned are basically that these are captives from war being brought back to Herxheim quite a long way, or that people are willingly traveling here to participate in these cannibalistic rituals. I don't know that we can ever find the kind of evidence that could settle such a debate, but this is not your average pile of human bones, right? Now, I know some of you will be rolling your eyes. Stefan, Milo, back at it again with another site that I'm blaming on ritual. I know you're rolling your eyes. I can practically hear the eyes rolling. Let's not pretend that ritualistic conflict and cannibalism isn't widely documented. Of course, the most famous example being the Aztecs, who would sacrifice captives of war to their god Huitzilopochtli. I'm sure I'm saying that incorrect. Without, their belief was without these sacrifices, the sun wouldn't rise. So human society, European society, prehistoric society, very, very capable of coming up with complex rituals and ideologies that would involve a lot of, munching of your neighbors. You're going to munch your neighbors because otherwise the sun might not rise. This kind of thing is well documented. But why so much conflict? Why so many pits, many, many sites? Why is this all happening during the LBK? Can archaeology give us any other clues? The first clue to this conundrum seems to be that the LBK was patrilocal. Basically, this means that men are staying put and women are on the move. There are a lot of genetic studies and isotope studies of human remains from the LBK time period. And, when you are examining the DNA of people from an LBK village, the men are much more closely related than the women. There's a lot of evidence to support this idea. Now, that's important because remember what I said at the start. These people are living on very specific pieces of riverbank, the most fertile pieces of riverbank. The second clue is that a lot of these pits seem to be dating towards the end of the LBK period. Not as common from the start, at least the majority of them. So, the hypothesis goes like this. In the early time period of the LBK, farmers are expanding. If you're the fifth son of your father, maybe all the land in your village is being taken up by your brothers, right? But that's not a problem because you can expand along the river. There are literally no other farming communities across Central Europe at this time, just sparsely populated areas of hunter-gatherers. You're free to travel up the river. You're free to move to a different river and basically build a new community. No problemo. But after 500 years of this lifestyle, 1,000 years of this lifestyle, are these specific points along the river starting to get full? If it's the end of the LBK and you're the fifth son, Now where do you expand? The next river over is full of communities. Downstream on your river, it's full of communities. Where do you go? Maybe you already had a village established, but after, a couple of centuries of farming, intensive farming, the soil just isn't what it was, and you have to move your entire village. Where do you go? So was this conflict brought about by the fact that they had a very specific lifestyle that required very specific pieces of land, and after several centuries of living like that, a lot of those pieces of land, the choice pieces of land, were taken? Something was causing a lot of conflict during this Neolithic period. This is just a hypothesis, of course. It's impossible to look back in time and examine the motivations of people. But across time, the motivations of people, we're probably fighting over the same things over and over again, aren't we? Resources, land. Maybe ideologically they had developed some sort of warrior culture, warfare culture that is kind of hard for us to see because we're still talking in the Stone Age here. I forgot to mention that. This is still the Stone Age. So a lot of the signs of warrior culture and elite behavior that we see in later periods, like the Bronze Age, maybe are just archaeologically invisible to us because they just don't have the stuff to display conflict and violence, or at least not stuff that survives archaeologically. Who knows what they were putting on wood and paintings and all of these things that are totally gone now. Whatever the cause, society at the end of this LBK time period seems to be under a lot of stress. There's a lot of conflict, maybe whole villages being absolutely wiped out, maybe people traveling hundreds of kilometers with captives to chop them up and have them for lunch. Yeah, it's really, really horrible. Don't go back in time, guys. We've literally now maybe just found the cure for diabetes. It's better now. It's better now. Do not go back to Neolithic Herxheim. This was a broadcast from the Time Travel Awareness Service.